If you have anxiety, I can pretty much guarantee that you have some degree of cognitive fusion. And understanding what cognitive fusion is and what cognitive defusion is can really help you recover from anxiety. So today I'm going to talk briefly about what cognitive fusion is and what cognitive defusion is and how they relate to anxiety. And then I'm also going to give you 3 techniques that you can put into place fairly quickly to help yourself recover from anxiety. So cognitive fusion is when we are totally engulfed by our thoughts. We believe them. We are probably physically experiencing them. We have a very hard time separating from them, and we kind of just think they're all true. We don't really have a separate identity in some ways. We aren't like, okay, this is me, and those are my thoughts. I can see myself thinking those thoughts. That's a little bit of defusion. So I do have a whole video explaining cognitive diffusion, and I can link it right here. But I think just that brief explanation will help you understand how this interacts with anxiety. Because what happens with anxiety is we begin to think about a problem, and we just go into the whole story. We project out into the future all the bad things that could happen. We might be catastrophizing. We could be jumping to conclusions, all of those cognitive distortions. But our mind is just racing with the problem. Meanwhile, we're generating all of our fight, flight, freeze chemicals. They're just in full force. And we're in no way in our planning brain or in our solution-focused brain, right? To come up with solutions, particularly creative solutions, we really need our full brain online. When we go into that anxious mode, it's mainly our amygdala, the fight, flight, freeze response, part of our brain, driving everything. So that fusion with anxiety is part of why we really believe our anxiety. Your anxiety wants to convince you that you have to do this. And I'm going to come back to that. But before I move off of the point of the fusion is really not having perspective from your thoughts, not separating from them, being totally in them, and they become your reality. Now, just going back to that point about anxiety wants to convince you that it exists. I was a psychotherapist for 20 years working with people with anxiety and trauma. And one of the things that got in the way of people recovering from anxiety initially, right? Because this is something you can get over. But one thing that got in the way was this belief that I have to worry about this. This is really, really important. How can I not worry about it? And you'll see that in some of my YouTube comments as well. Well, I have this health problem. How do I not worry about it? Of course, I should be worrying about it. I have this problem with my job, this problem with housing, this problem with a relative. It could go on. And yes, these are real problems. And sorting them through and thinking about them sometimes is helpful if there's something you can do about it. And engaging your planning brain, not letting the anxiety take over, but that anxiety is telling you, you need me, you have to do this. And that's part of the fusion. So cognitive diffusion, as it relates to anxiety, is separating from those anxious thoughts. You might still have the anxious thoughts, but you can look at them with a little bit more perspective from a bit of a distance, and you can separate it from the physical reaction that you're having. Now, I know that is much easier said than done. It can be very hard to do, but there are tools that if you practice them regularly, can really help and strengthen your ability to do this and your ability to be a bit more of an observer of your thoughts rather than drowning in them, rather than letting them control you. And if you diffuse from an anxious thought and kind of separate a bit, you don't have to spiral with it. It doesn't have to lead you to the next one and the next one. All right, let's talk about some techniques to do this. So I'm going to give you 3 very practical exercises you can do. And I'm going to start with the example of taking care of my granddaughter recently, which I was doing a couple of weeks ago. And she had a nightmare in the middle of the night. Now she's 4.5 years old. Her parents were away. She's not used to them being away. Wasn't too much of a surprise that she might have a nightmare, but she woke me up in the middle of the night, and I went to her room with her, and we laid down, and I was trying to think of different things to do to help her fall back to sleep, singing a song, telling a story, right? Just sort of deep breathing myself so maybe she could. But she wanted to talk about whether her dream would come true. She didn't really want to tell me the dream, but her anxiety was, how do I know a dream won't come true? So I addressed that anxiety directly, that dreams don't come true. They're something our brains make up while we sleep. And that can be hard to explain to a 4.5-year-old. But eventually I suggested, how about we put your nightmare into a balloon, and you pick the color of that balloon, and then we're going to let that balloon go and fly away into the sky. So she picked the color blue. I had her imagine putting the nightmare and the worries about that nightmare into that balloon and letting it float up to the sky. And after that, she did fall asleep. This came back up the next day, though, but I just want to say that at that moment she fell asleep. And that technique of using the balloon is basically the same as you might hear somebody say, let your thoughts fly away, let your anxieties be a car that's just driving by. So you can just sort of picture your anxiety in a car, have it drive by. But it's taking the thoughts sort of out of you, putting them somewhere, and letting them go. So any one of those tools, we can call it the balloon example. But as I said, it could be a river, it could be a cloud, it could be a car. That's a tool of cognitive diffusion. It's separating from the thoughts enough to actually visualize whatever you're worried about, putting it in something and letting it leave. So that's tool number 1. Okay, so day 2 with my granddaughter. So she slept fine the rest of the night. But it came back up the next day that she had had this nightmare. And we did talk about what the nightmare was. She told me what it was. And then she was really stuck on, how do I know it's not going to come true? And after she had asked me that many times, and I had tried many different things, I finally said, tell me the story of your dream in a goofy voice. And she looked at me and she just couldn't even imagine it. So I said, how about I tell you the story of your dream in a goofy voice? And she said, okay. And so I made my voice really high and squeaky, and I told her the dream in this very goofy voice. And she sort of smiled and laughed a little bit. And then we did it again in a different goofy voice. And then we did it again in a different goofy voice. And then I said, let's change the ending of the dream. Let's tell the story with a different ending. So in our goofy voices, we told a story that ended well. So this goofy voice technique is also a cognitive diffusion technique, which is part of acceptance and commitment therapy. And it's been proven that the goofy voice technique can really help. So the goofy voice technique is my number 2, and I'm going to give you a little corollary to it, which is that when I was working with people, I would have them create a character on their shoulder. So this one's sort of a bonus tip. I'm not counting it in the numbers. But I would have them create a character that represented their anxiety. And then when they had those anxious thoughts, they would put them in the character that was on their shoulder. So as you can see, that's even an extra step of diffusion, because you are putting like almost another being here, right? Could be like the Roadrunner, the Tasmanian Devil, whoever you wanted it to be. So that you can see that anxious voice as trying to accomplish something, but not in an effective way. All right, so we are going to move on to technique number 3, which is a little bit more sophisticated in a way. Oh, and I should say that even though I was using the example of a 4.5-year-old and her dream and her worries about her dream, and it's not something you worry about, perhaps, it's very applicable. Our anxieties work the same way no matter what we're anxious about, and pretty much no matter what age we're at. But this technique, this third technique, which we will call thoughts for sale, also from acceptance and commitment therapy, takes, I think, a little more distance, a little more ability to see the multitude of thoughts that you have a choice to go with. And I think journaling can really help with this technique. But the technique is basically to imagine that you are at a yard sale. And different thoughts or different types of thoughts are on the different tables, and you get to pick which one you go with. So you can take your rumination thoughts and put them at one spot on the table, and you can take your catastrophizing thoughts and put them at another table. And you could say, okay, being mindfully in the moment and listening to the birds and the sunshine, I'm going to put that over here. And maybe somewhere in between, we have a planning table. We have here, you can purchase the thoughts that go with planning, and you get to choose which ones you want to go with. Now, I know a lot of this is way easier said than done. And these techniques do take time and practice. Sometimes it's very helpful to have somebody outside of yourself who can help guide you through it, a therapist or a coach. And I don't do therapy anymore, but I do have an online program called Roadmap to Joy and Authentic Confidence. And it's a 6-month program because it takes a while to really put in place tools to help change these things. And the program is geared to help you with anxiety, negative self-talk, boundaries, really all of the things that help make life joyful and move us away from being in these like negative mind states, right? So I put all of that together in a comprehensive 6-month program with a workbook, pre-recorded videos, emails to remind you to move on to the next section or what you're working on. Anyway, I'll put a picture of it on the screen here. The link will be in the description to the video. Check it out. You might find it super helpful. And let me know of these 3 techniques, which one you want to try or which ones you have tried, and let me know how it goes. All right, take care.